I don't think there's ever been a fictional character I've been more excited to see additional information for that hasn't made a single speaking appearance than Rox D. Xebec, and the Rox Pirates. His existence first became known to the public in 2019, I believe it was, in the like earlier section of Wano, and I've been intrigued with him ever since. And I very much am intrigued with him, partially because of who I think he'll be a fascinating character, but also because of what he does for other characters. Um, when you have a character who we know had three characters who would eventually become 75% of the world's strongest pirates, the Yonko, under his command, that immediately makes you go, wait, who's strong enough to make all of these very different types of people adhere to his will and take orders from him? You know, when you know that he was the person who Garp and Roger had to team up to defeat in the God Valley incident, that makes you wonder what kind of person, you know, whether that's referring to his strength or just his personality, would be such a force to be reckoned with as to require the greatest Marine and the greatest pirates to have to come together to stop his reign or stop his advancements. I don't think there's ever been a single character that I've been this interested in because of just the relationships they're known to have with other people. Like, I'm interested in Luffy because I find the character interesting, and we were introduced to him in the story without any of the other Straw Hats around him. So our investment in that character comes from seeing him do things that make us invested in him. But with Rocks, it's literally all of these other characters. Like, we're introduced to Whitebeard, then we're introduced to Big Mom, then Kaido, and then we're told that they're all under the same crew, and that that same person, you know, had this big incident that required these two diametrically opposed forces to come together to defeat him. That sounds incredible, and I really hope, because I was kind of a little annoyed that the Odin flashback was 10 chapters. I thought it was a little long, but if they want to do 10 chapters on that, on the God Valley incident, whether that's just the fight itself or the stuff that led up to it, I'd be completely willing to sit through and read all of that. But I actually want to draw a historical comparison. A lot of times people will compare pirates in One Piece to pirates in real life. I think you can actually, and I know I might sound crazy when I say this, you can make a comparison between Rocks and George Washington. I, before anyone jumps down my throat, let me explain. Washington is considered a legendary American historical figure. Rocks was considered, or he would be if his record wasn't completely erased from history, a legendary figure. And one of the parallels that Washington has with Xebec is that in Washington's cabinet, he had multiple politicians who would either become as good as him in terms of their position or advance to having like a similar iconic status. So, for example, he had Adams as his vice president, who would later go on to become president. He had Jefferson as his secretary of state, who later became vice president and president. And he also had Alexander Hamilton, who became one of the leading American icons as it relates to the financial system. So that's three different people in his cabinet who achieved either a position or some iconic status that is debatably around the same level of reverence as him. In the case of Zebek, we have not seen his full crew. We don't know who else was on there. But having three people who became, again, 75% of the strongest pirates in the world on your crew, I think that's someone that would be considered to have had multiple people under them that became famous or close to the level of fame that they had. Maybe not as good, but pretty damn close. So that's why I made the comparison. I'm not trying to say that Washington was evil or anything. That's not the hill. That's not my hill to die on. I'm saying that they both have a legendary status that has a lot to do with, or you know, there's like a part of it that has to do with having multiple people under them who achieved some higher level of renown after their time. because all these people went to higher positions, except for maybe Hamilton after Washington's death. So it's the same thing with Xebec, where uh, Whitebeard, Big Mom, and Kaido all became bigger figures in the world following his passing. But I also want to talk about how he can do a lot for those three characters. So let's start with Whitebeard. A lot of people were confused about Whitebeard being on the crew of a guy that seemed to be evil with two other pirates that we know definitely are malevolent. Um, I think it could really, because Whitebeard, I like him as a character, but it could add a level of complexity if we find out that, yeah, I know, maybe we have a flashback where he's with, it's of his meeting with Xebec, and he says, I completely know that, our goals don't align, but if you work for under me, we can give you some money so you can keep bringing it back to that different any people or group you want to support, something that ties back to him being a benevolent figure who helps other people. And I think that would go a long way for just kind of showing that Whitebeard was willing to do anything it took, including join the crew of somebody that he didn't really think was that good of a person, if it meant helping others. I think that that would really be serviceable to us, because I really hope they don't try to say Whitebeard at one point became evil, and I don't think Oda would do something like that. So that's the theory I have, um, just based off of what we've seen from Whitebeard so far. And now you could even have it be established that he maybe felt after the death of Zebek that he should have been there for him, that he had failed a family member of his. Because he has the thing of your crew is your family, so that can play into his character as well. This is all stuff that I'm just spitballing. Kaido, I don't have as big of a interest in, just because he's of those three emperors, he's the one I like the least. Maybe you could go over kind of his position. Well, what did Zebek think of Wano? You want to have this place that's closed off to yourself. What did your pirate captain want to take over the world think of that? I can imagine we could see some clashes between them. Um, I've made no secret Big Mom's my favorite Yonko, but the reason I find her interesting is because we know she had a crew, by the time she was a little girl. So what did Zebek say to her to make her go from being someone who owned her own crew, called the shots, to working under him? And the other thing I find really interesting about, just the One Piece timeline is we know she had her first child when she was 18, and then just kept having kids with the 40 plus husbands after that. So I'd like to see what Zebek thought of that. Wow, this is a good way to grow a crew, just having kids over and over again. Because that's a very unique thing about Big Mom. And I think it would be interesting if we got to see Zebek's reaction to that, and kind of what his thoughts were on that. And also, if her older children have any memories or were involved with the Rocks Pirates. Maybe Sparrow was a member as a young boy, or an adolescent, because we don't really know much about the early lives of them. And I'm not asking for every single member of her family to get their backstory explained further, but a lot of that can service Big Mom's character, because outside of that flashback of when she was younger, and then these little brief touches of information about stuff she did as an adult, there's a really big that's one of the problems with having characters that are like in their 60s and 70s, and showing stuff from when they were really young. You're left with these like gigantic periods where there's really not that much to go over. And Wano, to its credit, has done a lot to correct that, with the Whitebeard and Roger clashing flashback. Stuff like that I really like, because it helps to flesh out characters that either we saw before and now like add more layers to them. This is something I think could really help Big Mom's character, because a lot of people see her kind of like as a joke, but there is this is why I wanted to make my Why I Love Big Mom video, just kind of explaining what things like about the character. There's something really strategic about having children to inflate the numbers of your army, and would wonder what Rocks would think of that, and how those children had to do with his crew. um Again, more flashbacks could be done just to show some other members, because I have a hard time believing that among the crews that we've seen, there's nobody else that's notable that was from there. I'd have to go look at characters that are like over the age of 40, but somebody that people have talked about him being Blackbeard's dad, which is hilarious. I don't think he is, just personally, but you know, I would find it very interesting if we got to see what Garp thought of him. Maybe what was Garp's first meeting with him, what was Roger's first meeting with him, what was their dynamic like, what was Sengoku's opinions on him. That's one of the good things by having these characters that have been around for a long time in the overall grand scheme of the story. They can give us peaks, and it feels natural because a lot of people in real life, if something traumatic or important or serious happens to them, they can remember it 10, 20, 30, 40 years after it happens, just like with Sengoku and Garp, theoretically. I would love to see the two of them just sit down and talk about um, Rocks and the Rocks Pirates for just, if they wanted to be multiple chapters, I'd be completely content with that. So he's just a character that and part of me feels like Oda knows that he's someone a lot of people are interested in finding stuff out about because he kept his face, with a silhouette. And a lot of times when he was like, we had Hancock mentioned for the first time before, Amazon Lily. We had Kaido mentioned for the first time during Thriller Bark. But a lot of characters that he would just mention in passing, he usually doesn't show a silhouette or any picture. I know he showed silhouettes of Kaido and Big Mom during the pre-time skip era, but the idea is that to me it seems like there's something special about Rocks just from the fact that his face is silhouetted. Like there's something that he wants us to know, and that's why I feel like he's building him up to be this very big character who's going to be serviceable. Like in his backstory, we're going to understand more about Whitebeard, who's still a popular character even after being deceased for 10 years, Kaido, and Big Mom, and possibly even more because we still don't know who the full force of his crew was. I think it would be great if someone on his crew was part of Blackbeard's crew. Again, I don't know the ages of all the different Blackbeard pirates, but like even if I don't buy into the idea that Blackbeard is his son, I still like the idea of him carrying on his will, like the way that Luffy and Roger are tied together, even though they never met each other and have no familiar connection. So if they did something like that, it would just kind of cement the idea that yeah, this is this generation's Rocks. But yeah, just a very interesting premise. Um, and he has the potential to be one of the best things that's happened to this series, at least in the post time skip era. Because one of the things a lot of early One Piece antagonists don't have is what I would call fleshed out backstories. Like we don't know that much about Kuro's backstory. We don't know that much about Don Krieg's backstory. Arlong, and this is something that Crocodile, who I think my favorite villain. But it's like there's a really good chance to not just use the story of Rocks to inform us about the world, but to also inform us about our antagonists. Because I'm assuming we're going to see Big Mom and Kaido again after this arc. But even if we don't, even if it's a situation where they both die or they're out of the story after this, I still would really like to see more about their past. I'm all for fleshing out characters, even ones that aren't, like with Kaido's not my favorite, but I'd still like to see that, and I definitely think that that's my biggest reason for wanting to know more about Rocks. I just hate that, like, I really thought when we first saw his picture, okay, we're gonna get some more stuff of him now. Then there's a 10 chapter flashback with Odin. I'm like, okay, we're gonna get some more stuff about Rocks now. Then the war starts. It's been like, what is it, 2 years almost? So I hope one day we do find out more about Rocks and the pirates that are part of his group. And when that happens, I'll try to make a video on it, and just kind of see whether or not my wants were met. And if they weren't, I'll be a little disappointed. But uh, that's just the way these stories roll. I think Oda did something really interesting by introducing this character. There's a lot of potential with this story, and I'm very eager to see where it goes. I think he's a terrific writer. I do some videos criticizing stuff, but this was not one of them. I'm really interested in just everything about Rocks. Is him as a character, the people that were in his roster. I really hope we learn more.